But let's talk about how storytelling is part of your world, and I'm sure it's part of everything you do.
The biggest mistake people make when it comes to their online platforms and the manner in which they use them is they usually just talk about what they want to talk about. I get that. I love to talk about my journey. I also feel like it adds value, but there are certain times I absolutely have to make sure that I'm actually giving the audience what they want. That's the most important thing. Something that was normal, an event or explosion, and a new normal, and then people say, I could do that. And that's when you start to build an audience, when you inspire people and you make them realize you are completely relatable and you are human.
What if you had a dream or desire to write your first book? You could finally share your story or express your views about a topic or subject you are passionate about. And what if 2020 became the year your dream became a reality? Turn a new chapter in your life, literally. Join me for a live webinar where I'll share my 10-step program for writing a best-selling book. Register now. Seats are limited. Don't miss it. I believe in you. Your best-selling book is waiting to be written. Don't let another week slip by.
This is American Real. I am Roger Brooks. My guest today is Rich Cardona. You are a video strategist, a video creator for executives, and storyteller for your personal brand. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Man, I am too, because today we're going to talk about a lot of things that I love to do. And we spoke a couple of weeks ago, and you're doing so many wonderful things out there that is very relatable to me, mainly video marketing, storytelling, and personal branding, which are some of the things we're going to talk about today. But
sure,
if you can, Rich, let's start with video marketing. If you could tell us, what you do in that realm and what it really means today, because it's changing so fast, isn't it?
absolutely. So there's two different types of marketing that a lot of people are used to, and it's direct marketing, where I'm literally making very flagrant advertisements for you to buy a product or a service. And then there's kind of brand marketing, which looks into a little bit more of the brand and just making it something that sticks in your head a little bit. So subconsciously, you just always remember them when it comes to that burger or that shoe or whatever it may be. I focus specifically on the people within the brands or the companies, because I believe people are intriguing, which is why you have a podcast, which is why I have a podcast, which is why we love to talk to people and learn from them. So video marketing to me is important in two ways. So I kind of broke down those two pieces of marketing, but video is outperforming everything. You cannot tell me a social media platform right now that doesn't incorporate video as its probably highest leverage point, which is why TikTok is surpassing everything, for example, in terms of downloads over the last quarter, last 6 months. Because it's video, it's catchy, it's bite-sized, it's quick, it's easy, and it tells a story in a billion words, versus a picture, right? So So I focus on video, and then I focus on the people within the brands or the companies. And, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but I just believe that is where the attention is at. And this is nothing new. You could hear this from almost anyone that's probably involved in marketing, but a lot of people still, for some reason, are reluctant. And I just want to share this one example. A friend of mine has medical laboratories, and he had me do some work for one of the laboratories, and it went amazing. So he's like, we'd love to have you back. We want to do something like this, a little mini documentary. I'm like, great. And he goes, hey, I just talked to, the leadership, and they're like, we're trying to cut down on expenses, and it's non-essential. So, we'll revisit in a few months. I'm like, tell them, thank you, I'll be here. But the reason you're cutting back on expenses is because you don't have a video marketing budget in the first place, and because I know, I could already see when I went there the first time, like pamphlets, all these things, like it's okay. But what if you had a series of all the things that you do for this job fair that you want to go to, or for recruiting, or to just educate people on what happens within these laboratories, so that way you could be more, close the gap between your competitors. So that's how I feel about it. I know it works. Video, I mean, you can't point to any statistics that say otherwise, and I believe in it, most importantly.
Yeah, no doubt. And, the one thing that comes to mind right away is that how many companies would you say out there right now, even though video is the trend, right? I mean,
sure,
we know that, but
Mm-hmm.
how many companies are still behind the eight ball? What's the percentage? It has to be an awful large percentage.
I mean, I'll put it to you this way. When I go on Instagram, when I go on LinkedIn, and I look at company pages, which are hard to really get a following, I would say 80% of them are doing everything they think they're supposed to be doing, which is your standard pictures, your standard template, a picture, some stock photo with inspiring words on it. And I mean, it's just not the same. Like, no one is going to be able to connect with the picture. People are going to connect with the people. People are going to connect with the story, more importantly. And I think everyone's just behind, and there's just fears associated with it. And it's just really interesting. It seems like this large task, like video cameras and all these crazy things. And I don't want to be on camera, and all these dismissals before you even actually try it. And I think that's why the people who do use it are going to thrive.
I was just going to say, the moral of the story is, right, the sooner you do it, the better you're going to be, and those will get left behind. And I think it's like this in any industry. If you're not moving with the trends, I do a lot in the gas and convenience space, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about 20, 30 years ago when you went to a gas and convenience store, it was much different than today.
Yeah, exactly.
You get companies like Wawa and Sheetz and Cumberland Farms that have really raised their game. It becomes the new standard, right? So same thing here with video, and I'm right with you. I was just curious because you're in the space,
Mm-hmm.
What percentage of people, but I guess the point is, if you're not doing it, you really better start.
Yeah. And last thing I want to say on that is, I don't try and tell people this is what you can get. I try and point out, and this isn't a tactic, it's just the truth. Like, your competitors will surge. Like, they will take money from your pockets if they have a legitimate investment in doing this and being more visible. And that's the whole thing. You just have to be visible in this day and age, and that's the way to do it. But I mean, the fear trumps a lot of things, and it just doesn't have to be that way. There's people out there like me that can help.
No, that's great, Rich. And one question I do have out of this segment here is that I think what I heard you say is one portion of it may be taking all of your printed content, turning that into video, because there's most companies have a ton of content.
Yeah.
Bring that to video, but then step two is to get the people involved, the personalities behind the company. And when you go into a company, are you looking for one ambassador or several ambassadors to be doing video? How would you advise there?
That is a fantastic, no one's asked me that, and I'm so glad you asked it. So this is how I look at it. What I do specifically when I started was I worked with the CEO specifically, because they have a good founder story. They have the purpose story. They have the value story. They have all of it. And it's my job to help them tell that, because this is new territory for them. But they also, some of them are looking for opportunities on the personal side. I'd like to go to some keynotes. I'd like to be on some podcasts. I want people to know. So that is how it kind of started. But now we do profiles of leadership teams. If I, went to, company A, and I talked to their CFO, and he was giving educational tips on big financial mistakes for people in startups, and then I went to the CTO and them talking about how cybersecurity is nothing that could be ignored in this day and age. And then we went to the CHRO, and then they were talking about how turnover is the biggest expense of any company. All these different things, if you could highlight the people within. Now that being said, this is a very important distinction. These people have to want to get that message out. The fear is one thing, but if they don't want to get the message out, even someone like me is not going to be able to really craft that and bring it out of them, and it's just going to come across as a talking head that's very boring.
And you're saying from a personal standpoint, that person must be invested in doing this video, otherwise it won't work.
Exactly. It's not even the video. Do they want to convey this knowledge to the masses? If that's not something that is just kind of innately something they want to do, then that's fine. But I would certainly say, like, let's not use this, or we won't be using Sarah, so to speak. So for us, we are very particular about who we take on, because the value piece, the altruism, the absence of the fear of giving away knowledge is a big driver for us, because we know those people are going to shine and present and assist and to help.
Right. No, it is. It just, when you think about it and you take a step back, it makes sense, right? It makes so much sense.
Sure.
And I would love to, get an example or two. Maybe you could share one of your client stories with us. How you help transform them. Is that something you're able to do?
Absolutely. I'll tell you about my very first client, and this is hopefully I don't take forever with this story. I'll try and be quick with it. When I didn't even have this company yet back in 2018, and I went to a summit called Vid Summit in Los Angeles, and essentially it was YouTubers and people in social media, just 2.5 day conference full of amazing keynotes. I went to go see Gary Vee specifically, and I was just there, just kind of learning. I had just quit my job at Amazon, and I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I was approaching 40. I am still approaching 40. And I was just figuring things out. And I had a question for Gary Vee. I positioned myself very strategically, and I had this 10-minute exchange with him. It was unbelievable, and I have it on camera. And this gentleman comes up to me in a session, a separate class session, which is like an hour later, and he taps me on the shoulder, and he gives me a coin, and it's a challenge coin. And he was a sailor, and he has this big beard, and he's just talking to me, and there's someone presenting, and he's like whispering and like, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you." And he just wouldn't stop. I'm like, oh my, like, this is not the time or place. It was hilarious though. And then we met outside and we talked, and he was there for no particular reason either. He had a company that helps veterans become project managers, but he resonated with something I said in that interaction with Gary Vee. So we sat at the bar, and he had a yellow notepad out, and I swear we talked for 2 hours, and that thing was almost full. And a couple months later, he saw me doing videos on LinkedIn. He goes, "Why were you holding out on me?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "I want to do videos." And I go, "Okay." And he goes, my brand is attached to the company only. I want my brand." And I said, "Okay." So we started doing some videos together, and he goes, "Okay." He calls me RC. He goes, "RC," he goes, "if we do this, like, my goal is I would like 12 speaking engagements, one per month for the time I work with you. And to me, that's a win." Well, we got 19 in 6 months. And his brand and his business are just going into uncharted territory. He's re-signed with us, of course, and we've helped him create a YouTube channel, and that led to a lot of referrals. But the thing is, And this is so important. When I mentioned earlier about direct marketing and brand marketing is slow and not sexy. It's ugly. And sometimes it just feels like, oh, wow, everyone's winning. We really took the time to make sure people understood who he was, what he's about. We don't talk blatantly ever about the business or the product. Now we've started to, because he's built up a trust with his virtual audience online. That being said, he is very highly sought after now and looked at as someone who's very, elevated. Let me give you an example. He had been invited to panels and panels and panels, and now they're like, dude, we want you as a keynote.
That's great.
So the point is this, like a lot of people, when it comes to direct marketing, obviously there's a very specific ROI attached to that, because you want to see, okay, like how much did I sell for this investment? When it comes to your brand, you're not selling. You have to go into it from a place of, this is going to take a while, and I want to cultivate real good connections with the people who are my target audience. And in time, it works. And eventually people will be inquisitive about your business the more they get to know you. And the ROI, so to speak, is the engagements and the podcast, and now all these different changes. I always say it's like going to the gym. Sometimes the scale doesn't move, but maybe your pants fit lighter. Non-scale victories. So that's my first client, and I mean, it's just been amazing for everyone else since then as well.
What a great story. I appreciate you sharing that with us, because it's very relatable for people as well as myself.
Yeah.
Storytelling. That's something that I know is really, really important to you.
Yes.
Something important to me as well. But let's talk about how storytelling is part of your world. And I'm sure it's part of everything you do.
It is part of everything I do. Storytelling is a very big buzzword nowadays, but I also know that a lot of people love the idea, but don't actually love the practice. The practice of storytelling is very simple. And I like to try and give this method for people to realize how easy it is to tell your story. And actually, we could literally just use the example I gave. The normal for this client of mine was getting invited to panels, not being extremely highly visible, being respected, but not necessarily highly visible. This is the normal. This is the first piece of the story, the normal. The explosion was we met, and then he decided to invest in me for help. That was the explosion. He just realized, like, hey, this guy's out there. I want to be out there. He realized there was a divide between his brand and the company brand, or that it needed to be, and he wanted to accelerate his own personal growth. So he hired me. That was the explosion or the event. That's number 2. Number 3 is the new normal. Now he's highly sought after. His company's going incredibly well. He's doing incredibly well. We're still working together. And now he has a YouTube channel so he can make a library of content related to veterans and project management. Normal, event, new normal. That is it. That is how you position your story. Now, storytelling, like, okay, but when do I use a story? When do I use a story? The biggest mistake people make when it comes to their online platforms and the manner in which they use them is they usually just talk about what they want to talk about. I get that. I love to talk about my journey. I also feel like it adds value, but there are certain times I absolutely have to make sure that I'm actually giving the audience what they want. That's the most important thing, period. I mean, you cannot just shove whatever it is you want to talk about down people's throats, no matter how relevant, no matter how enthusiastic, no matter how charismatic you are about it. You have to put the audience first. And that's obviously a good practice in any business, put the customer first. So when it comes to storytelling, the real easiest way to conceptualize this is to determine the questions that you get asked most in your industry. What are the biggest mistakes people are always making? What are the trends right now, which is why I talk about video marketing? What are the trends right now that people aren't seeing? You craft that into a story in which someone could relate to, just like I did with that example of that first client, then people will be drawn to that. And it doesn't have to be a story. It could be a bite-sized 90-second clip or text or copy on a post about something that was normal, an event or explosion, and a new normal. And then people say, I could do that. And that's when you start to build an audience, when you inspire people and you make them realize you are completely relatable and you are human.
Wow. Oh, I'm so happy you walked us through that, because like you said, storytelling is a very common term today,
Hmm.
but people do it differently. And
Yes.
your process is very unique. And I love the way you position that. A question I have for you though is, does that include giving examples, say, or stories of things that are happening on a day-to-day basis, examples and things like that? Is that part of it as well?
Yes, in my opinion, absolutely. So we don't. When I make content for my clients, I absolutely go in knowing there's going to be certain questions that I may have that I want to make sure we hit, and I do it very interview style, so it comes across as extremely human. But we also love to get the behind the scenes. I mean, I interviewed. I was very fortunate to be hired on for an event in Baltimore back in November, and I got to interview 15 congressmen and women, and it was incredible.
Wow.
And we were there, and I've told the story a couple times recently because it just like stuck in my mind. When I met these individuals, they were like unbelievable. Like they were super cool. They're like, Rich, what's up, bro? Oh my, I was like, okay, it's like that. Here I am trying to be super formal, but they were extremely normal. Of course, when we started recording, because this was a specific event, it was very on brand. And then afterwards, it was like, Rich, call me anytime, dude. What? Yeah, I'm like, okay. Now, how does this relate to behind the scenes? Because I imagine myself in the back seat of a car in a black Suburban with some of these people just talking about, like, you are behind in the polls today in your district. Like, how are you feeling? That is compelling content, because everyone loves to posture about how well things are going. But the behind the scenes, the day-to-day, the losses, the failures, the process is very intriguing to a lot of people. So I highly encourage people to talk about the behind the scenes, or the good or the bad days, just as much as the good days. So when it comes to storytelling, reality, it's like reality work instead of reality TV, like reality work. Sometimes my COO and I will set up a camera in here, and we'll be just going through thought processes of certain things. And we're like, okay. And then, oh, I'm glad we were recording that. We just had like a breakthrough, and it was caught on camera. And it's just a little us right here. But maybe one day I could show that when we are huge, and there we go. And I have it to look back on all the time.
And that's another great point, right? Is don't be afraid to put the camera on.
Yes.
Record these meetings, wherever you are. David Meltzer's really good at that.
Yes.
You see him in hotels, you see him outside, you see him on the airplane, and he's always talking to people, but they're capturing that content, which is so raw.
Yes.
It's wonderful to see, and it's very engaging.
That's what people are looking for. I mean, look, you and I are on social. Like when we're scrolling, we are looking for something that's, what is going to stop us? And it's something that a lot of times looks unprepared, that isn't like completely highly produced, that is very real. I mean, I've just posted something the other day when I ran into Gary Vee at the elevator when I was in New York. It was nuts. And I was like, okay. So I gave my phone to my videographer because we didn't have any cameras out. I'm like, dude, just record this. And it was a great moment where I just got to thank him and tell him, hey, since I did the podcast with you, my company has doubled, and he's like, you could tell the sincerity in his eyes. But that little clip did phenomenal, better than anything that I've actually crafted recently. And it just goes to show you the behind the scenes is where it's at.
And also being prepared, right? You have to be ready for those moments. And when they happen, to just take the phone out, right? Because a lot of times in the moment we get caught up and we forget and we say, oh, I wish I recorded.
100%. Like I always imagine if I'm ever like near The Rock or something like that, who like I really look up to just because of his journey, like I will always have something at the ready. There's no way I'm just going to let that thing be a picture. So yeah.
Phenomenal. Would you mind sharing the Gary Vee story with us, how you were able to be on the podcast?
Sure. Well, I had him on mine, but they actually produced it in the Gary Vee audio experience as well, which I did not know was going to happen. So I was flattered. So a lot of people ask me this, and I don't actually think I've shared this story publicly, but just because it's long and I want to make a video about it. But it all started when I was miserable at my job, and I was living in Austin, Texas at the time, and I was just there on a Friday night, and I was just scrolling, and somehow this guy ended up in my feed. Not somehow, very strategically, obviously on his part, and I was like, "Who the hell is this?" And like he says to a lot of people, at first you probably hated me, and I'm like, "Yep," and then I started to be like, "Wow, he's telling us what we need to hear. And then I just started listening, and I just became obsessed to the point, I shouldn't say it like that, but really clinging to it because it was like a life raft for me to imagine my way out, so to speak. So the first time I met him, I had bought tickets to this real estate convention where he was giving a keynote in Los Angeles. I was in Austin. I went and I paid the however much extra to make sure I was VIP seating, and I got to do a meet and greet afterwards with him, et cetera, et cetera. Well, just like I told you about VidSummit, which was about 8 or 12 months later, I positioned myself very strategically, buy a microphone, sitting, and all this stuff. And I had to I got an exchange with him that first time. So I gave him a squadron patch. I'm like, hopefully, he remembers this because I was in the military. Maybe he doesn't get any squadron patches ever. So here you go. Hopefully he'll remember it. In the back, I told him, hey, I'm miserable where I'm at. This, and this. And he was, there's a line behind me. So it was fast. It wasn't anything special. But I followed up months later and months later and months later. And I just kept pinging people where he was. And I bought tickets to VidSummit. I went to VidSummit, and I know he's about providing value first. So I donated a significant amount of money that I didn't even have to his favorite charity. So I was like, that is out of the box. Okay. A lot of people will make him a shirt. A lot of people will say, hey, can I do this? Or, what can I give you? I was like, let me donate to his favorite charity because I saw him in Africa with it. And I was like, this is obviously important to him. So I positioned myself strategically. I told him, Gary, I quit my job. Since I last saw you, you've changed my life. And he stopped and he just dropped F-bombs everywhere. Like, you have no idea how that makes me feel. Like, you are so humble. And it was just this unbelievable exchange. And I said, I fast forwarded to the end, and I told him what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, how I downsized, how life has changed. And also, by the way, I have a screenshot of a donation I made to your favorite charity. If I could get 10 minutes with you in New York, he goes, let's do it. So then there we go. So that 10 minutes was actually 5 minutes, but it was within a month. And it seemed like that 5 minutes was 5 hours. All I did was just say, thank you. And all he wanted to do was, how can I help you? How can I help you? How can I help you? So fast forward, I'm like, okay, it's almost been a year. I want to interview him on Veterans Day because this would be so important because my podcast is for veteran entrepreneurs and Gary V would be humongous. So sending some things, sending, stuff to his admins. And by the way, because I do video, I interviewed essentially his whole C-suite so they could have content for themselves.
So smart.
Yeah. So, and then I developed relationships with them. Now, let me tell you, and I'm very close with his chief heart officer, but none of them have ever got me in his office. Like, it's not like that. They're not like, hey, Gary, can you get Rich in here? No, it's not like that. They don't offer. I don't ask because it's just, I don't want the relationship to look like it's founded upon that. But I did make content for them. They all were very happy with it. They were, either appeared on the podcast or I cut it up for them. So they had content for themselves. So at least I could say that to some of his admins, and they had me booked for November 11th, which was Veterans Day. I was looking forward to this forever. And then the day before, they're just like, we can't, things. And I was like, oh man. So they're like, can you do December, whatever? I'm like, whatever day you say, like, I will be there. So I go this second time, this third time I've ever met him, and I'm waiting an hour and a half. And it was just like one of those things where I'm like in his office with 2 videographers, and we're just like sitting there. And I'm like, okay, like this is how it is. You just have to sit here. So he comes out, and then we do 15 minutes, and it was just unbelievable. But here's all I can say. The process, like anything that is worthwhile, is long. It takes a lot of effort. It takes outside of the box thinking. And if you are passionate enough about it, you will never take no as an answer. And your rebuttal will be met with whatever your rebuttal is. You will have a creative solution to do it. If this person has impacted me as much as I've said he has right here on this podcast, then of course I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And of course I'm willing to stand on my head for 3 hours if I need to, if that's what it's going to take. And it was worth it. So then when I was in New York just last week, I flew up for a podcast. The person forgot I was supposed to be on that podcast. I go and spend some time at Vayner with Claude, the chief heart officer. We make some content. My videographer and I are like, it's 2 something. Like, we need to eat. So we go eat instead of editing footage. And there we are at the elevator. He's like, hey. And I'm like, oh my Lord. And now, look, the point is this. He knows why I was there. He goes, you here for Claude? I go, yep. Because he knows I help her with content. And then when we get out of the elevator, I get to thank him, and that's it. But look,
Man.
he knows my face now. He knows that I've helped people around him, and he knows that I don't ask anything for him. I just love to like really show him gratitude. And I think that's the name of the game, is just no expectations, just really, having an attitude or a gratitude first kind of approach. And, I say he knows my name. That doesn't mean anything. I'm just saying he recognized me. And to me, that means a lot. And when he says, keep going, he looked at me like, keep going. I'm like, okay. And that's it. I mean, and that's where we're at.
Wow, Rich. Look, I am so grateful that you shared that story. Number one, it's not every day that someone has the opportunity to meet Gary Vee.
Yeah.
But the process of all of it and the authenticity of it and the honestness of it. I mean, all those words come to mind as you're telling this story because this is what you wanted. But again, this life lesson with Gary Vee can be applied to anything in life, right? I mean, anything. It's what you have to put in the work.
Yes.
And you have to do it for the right reasons.
Yes.
And the outcome can be manifested to what you have always planned for.
I want to make one point. Thank you for that. I have reached out to other people as well who are, in my opinion, on a lower rung, so to speak, of the social media hierarchy than Gary Vee. And they're like, yeah, absolutely, we'll do the podcast. And they're like, $2,000. I'm like, what? I'm like, I've met Gary Vee a bunch of times. Like, this dude is a CEO who's one of the busiest people on earth, and he's willing to engage with his audience just in the most incredibly unselfish way. And I'm not saying that was a turnoff. I get it. Time, people's time is worth money, but that just goes to show you, I feel like I nailed it, right? I knew the right person to follow. Of course I could whip out my credit card for some of these people who I believe have taught me a lot as well, but what does that say about him? And it's just, he's just different.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up because I actually trained under Brian Rose at London Real, and he's one of the best in the business.
Yeah.
But one of the things he taught us, two things actually, and I'll be careful about how I say this because it's not always true from what I've come to learn. But he was basically saying you don't want to necessarily interview people that are reaching out to you for an interview. Like you have to do your due diligence. Now there are exceptions, right? So he said, be aware of that. But the other thing, the unwritten rule in podcasting is never charge anyone or never pay anyone to go or be on your podcast.
Yeah.
So
that's crazy. Yeah.
But it's important to let people know this, right? You and I were spending our time on a Saturday because we're trying to create content. We're trying to deliver value because that's what we believe in. There's no other, maybe we'll do business together someday, but that's not why we're talking today. I met through LinkedIn. We had a nice couple phone conversations, and here we are, right? Yeah. So this is how, this is, I think, the effect of Gary Vee's teaching.
Yes.
Of Ed Milet's teachings,
exactly.
Of Dave Meltzer's teaching, and all the wonderful women out there like Lauren Everett's, Bostic, and many, many others who live this every day. So, man, am I glad you shared that story.
Yeah. It just it reminds me that night when I went to my hotel, I was just thinking the humility on him and some of these people I've come in contact with, you just expect differently. You expect to be ushered off or dismissed, but I don't know how they do it, but these are some of the most special people out there that really will take that extra minute or two and be late for another meeting because they just said hi to one more person. And that's just the way it is. But yeah, absolutely. Some of those people you mentioned are fantastic as well.
Yeah, and I was talking to this gentleman last night, Chester Elton, who has an amazing following on LinkedIn.
Oh, awesome. I have to look
4 or
him up.
5-time New York Times bestseller. He's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Please engage with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wrote it down.
Yeah, and one of the things we were talking about was living in each moment, right? And you kind of just alluded to it that, okay, yes, I could bypass this person or not say hello, but it's those moments of constantly being aware and present with people. You never know who you might impact at that moment. So, you can't take things for granted and be too much up here. You have to be more here, which
Absolutely.
I think is exactly what you were saying.
Absolutely.
Okay. Wow. This is great. I think this is a nice segue into you've had, we'll talk a little bit later about your training. You were in the Marines,
Sure.
but something that's important to you and that you're really good at is how you, as you call it, unwrap people.
Yes.
You have a very good skill, and that's something I try hard as well. Like just engaging with you now, we're talking about things. You told me you said a couple of things today that you've never told. That's, to me, that's an honor.
Yeah.
And I know that's what you do too.
Yes. Yeah. I have no formal training background in anything. I was a Marine. I was an infantryman. I became a pilot after so many years. I became commissioned as an officer. I worked at Amazon. I have an MBA, which wasn't specialized, so to speak. It was your normal stuff: statistics, marketing, entrepreneurship, finance. I mean, all that stuff, which for me was a decent experience. But I wasn't in the entrepreneurial mindset then. I wasn't receiving the information well. I was just worried about how do I even fit in this class. It was an executive MBA, and I was surrounded by people who'd been in their respective industries for so long. So I don't have anything that should make me able to unwrap people, but I now have dug into my memories and just realized it started back when I worked at a hospital when I was a senior in high school. And just a quick backstory: I'm a first-generation American, and at one point, my parents and both sets of grandparents worked at this hospital, and they were not doing what you think people do at hospitals. They were cleaning toilets, they were doing handyman work, they were doing secretarial work. There was nothing sexy about it. And I ended up working there as well. My entire family worked at this hospital in New Jersey, and I worked in the coffee shop, which was I believe it was a nonprofit. I don't remember how it was structured, but we couldn't even get tips or anything like that. And I remember people offering me tips all the time. Now, why am I telling?
It's awesome, by the way, that you all worked at the
yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. But here's what I could tell you. Why? What does that have to do with anything? I would serve coffee, lunch, dinner, breakfast to a different person dealing with something different every interaction. It could be someone who just lost a loved one. It could be someone who just had a baby. It could be someone who, has a broken arm. It could be someone who's been there for 40 days watching someone go through treatment, whatever it may be. So I would just interact with these people and just try and be pleasant at what I didn't know anything. All I knew is I was just trying to be pleasant, and I tried to do my job really well. And for whatever reason, that was just something that I think carried over as my time went on in life to where, I mean, don't get me wrong, like Marine Corps is very different in terms of leadership, but that EQ that was kind of like deposited at age 17 unearthed itself after I got out of the Marine Corps. Not to say I didn't have EQ while I was in, but it's just different. And then I just now had this 17 years of leadership experience and working with people from all over the world, people in different countries, people who I would never be friends with if I didn't know them from the Marine Corps, things like of that nature. And then I had the EQ to pile on top of that. Unwrapping people comes from a genuine inquisitiveness about who they are and why they're here and what they want to do with this one at bat that we all get. And I am able to just dig into answers, I would say, more than the normal average person. People on my podcast, or who I invite to be on the podcast, sometimes say, hey, you know, can you send me over the questions? And I'm like, I don't know what we're going to talk about. I want to take it where I want to go, where it takes us. I mean, I pick people for a very specific reason. Like I'll say, this person's in finance. We're going to talk about something financial. This person is in a startup. We'll talk about risk. This person is, a life coach. We're going to talk about self-awareness, whatever it is. But I know the concept, but I don't know what we're going to talk about, because that's how I like it. And you know what? They come across exactly like that. It just seems like happens to be microphones and a couple cameras around that people forget about within the first 60 seconds. And that, to me, is better than any statistics and being a top 100 or anything show of any kind, because I know that person had a good experience. And you know what happens at the end of that when we follow up is there anything I could do for you? That was amazing. And I'm not saying that to toot my own horn. I'm just saying it became less of an event and more of like a coffee date. And that's what I want.
Wow. Powerful, Rich. Very powerful. Do you encourage others to start their own podcasts, being that we're on the topic?
To start podcasts?
Yeah, to have their own podcast, to be the interviewer. How valuable is that to be able to engage with people at a different level? And as you just spoke of, I mean, you're able to talk to someone and converse with them and get to know them, pretty well.
That's another question no one's asked. Here's my take on it. You and I both have our respective traditional things that we do. This is an extension of that, which means there's part of us that longs to be creative, which I never considered myself to be a creative until a couple of years ago. If you want to podcast because of vanity metrics or the belief that there is going to be a revenue stream created out of it or anything like that, then I believe you're probably already on the wrong path. If you want to do it and you think you could do this week after week and do the production or have people help you out with it, and you genuinely want to help bring value to people in some way, shape, or form, then I think it's going to be absolutely great. And that's not to say you can't have your own solo podcast where you're just talking about, I don't know, I'm looking at my Dunkin' Donuts coffee right now. You're talking about all the different types of coffee in the world and how you study them, whatever it may be. You and I both know that 180 days or 6 months is kind of that cutoff. If you're not consistent for at least that first 6 months, then I mean, the potential to fall off a cliff is extremely high. So it makes sense for you. It makes sense for me to absolutely do this. It's not entirely hard to set up a podcast or to start a podcast, but you have to, for lack of a better phrase, you have to be in love with the process. Just like if you want to lose 20 pounds, you have to be okay with getting up at 5 and getting to the gym before all the machines are taking. And you have to be okay with not having McDonald's after the gym and having a protein shake instead. You have to love all the little things about it. You have to love about going through and sifting through the clips and looking for the best sound bites and writing show notes and all that stuff. If you can do that, then go for it. Absolutely go for it. If you have expectations, which we've already talked about, to be, I want to be here. And I'm not saying goals, goals are different, but expectations of this should get me this, then it's probably not the right idea.
Man, am I glad you just said that. Wow. That's awesome. I've had the privilege to teach some people through my podcast course.
Nice.
And you know what? We talk about a lot of these things, and people have great ideas and great desires, but you're so right that you have to go into it for the right reasons. And again, it's like anything. We help people write their first book. Yep. Same thing. If you're not in love with the process, if you're not going to dedicate the time, if you're not going to find your own space to do it, it's not going to happen. The book will not write itself.
Correct.
But on the reverse, if you are in love with the process, if you are passionate about what you're doing, and if you're doing it for the reasons that you mentioned previously, then it will happen, and a wonderful piece of art will be created, whether it's a podcast, a book, a piece of video content. So again, I don't have the opportunity to talk to people about this often, so I'm really, really glad that we didn't plan this,
Let me ask you this. And like, I love to flip the script in the middle of a podcast, by the way, but let me ask you this, because you're a podcaster, I promise you've had a moment where someone has written you a DM or an email and saying that episode meant something to me, or I got something from it. And that feeling, there's no price tag on that feeling, right? I mean, so does that happen to you?
It does. And look, I have to be honest. So in the beginning, I was really excited and I was reading everything, and but it's like anything. After a while, and I'm very accessible, and I do like to respond. But when you get that one message that someone may say, "Look, that episode really made an impact on me," or it changed my life. I mean, I've had people say it's like, wow, that's when you know that your purpose is much greater than you, right? And that's when you know that we have to keep doing this. We have to keep engaging. And this hopefully won't be our last conversation. Yeah. Because we probably have much more to unleash that we're not aware of today. So I'm always like thinking about that. But it happens. And that's
it's your social proof. And I mean, that's it. Like that's all you need. And that's how you know, I'm going to keep going.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? You did mention about the hospital. I think it's so cool that the whole worked there. What was the upbringing like? And then how did you end up going into the Marines? Probably the most challenging of the armed forces, I would guess.
Yeah, I could tell you that. I could tell you there's a piece of that story. But for sure, I was first generation American, like I mentioned. Grew up in Morristown, New Jersey, and look, for whatever reason, I avoided learning Spanish. It was a completely strange cultural existence that I lived in where I just never felt like I fit in. I didn't look like my cousins. I looked American. I mean, I look American to me. And, I just didn't sound like everyone else. So it was really kind of strange upbringing. And I just didn't feel like I belonged. We moved around a couple times in the local area. Just went through school, no problem. I had behavioral problems. I would always get unsatisfactory and self-control, but I'm a restless dude. I was a restless kid. It's just the way it is. And I mean, look, like this is a completely different topic, but school is not the place for me. I learned so much more by being around people and listening to people and doing rather than just kind of learning via a book. That being said, I just, like I said, I never felt like I belonged. Played a few sports, but I got into drugs and alcohol and realized as a junior, this is not going to end well, and my parents didn't have the money to send me to college, or at least I'm certain they didn't, but if they did, I was going to waste it. I wasn't ready. I knew already that school wasn't the place for me. So I said, I'm going to go to the military and I am just going to, get some money for education so I don't have to burden them with that. And I'm going to get out and I'm going to have a lot more character and discipline. I was not thinking going into the Marine Corps or going to a recruiter's office thinking like, I'm going to serve my country. I'm going to serve my country. It was very much a selfish reason. And obviously once you're there, you are all about service to your country, but I didn't go in there like that. And I went to the office. Navy recruiters weren't there. Marine recruiter was there. Boom, boom, boom. And then, you can't go into Marine recruiter's office and mention that you're
walking out.
Period. So I enlisted completely with the intent to do 4 years and get out. And went in 1998, and 3 years later, 9/11. So I stayed in, and I thought I was just going to stay in just a little while longer. And that initial 4 years turned into 17 years. I retired early, and that was it. But what I could tell you about service, and I'm going to just reduce this to the smallest bite-sized piece of it, is you just are surrounded by people that want to do so much more. It's just crazy. I really don't even have, I'm like, the words are escaping me right now. Just thinking about some of the people I was surrounded by, some of the people that had I not been in the Marine Corps, I would have judged them. people who were from the deep South, people who were from the West Coast, people who looked at me different. There's we all have the same face in the Marine Corps because we all any military service for that regard. And that is, we have a purpose that's bigger than ourselves. And when push comes to shove and we deal with the events that we dealt with, it's amazing to see what that looks like when everyone elevates their potential to the highest possible standard. And in some cases, they give everything for it. And, that was my experience. And I miss it to an extent, but I also don't miss the fact that, I was had many people who I would consider brothers who are no longer here. And that was extremely challenging. And that played a part in my failure to assimilate, so to speak, on the outside, because, I like people who take people really seriously. And that's why I do what I do now. And that's why I had to get out of the environment I was in after my first job. So
amazing, Rich. And thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Thanks for your support.
Absolutely. And wow, went in with the intent of 4 years and you served 17. That's
dead set on that.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, give us a little bit of Amazon. We need to know about Amazon, your experience.
Yeah.
And before you start, if you don't mind, I would just love to say, I love how we're kind of connecting all these dots. People say connect the dots backwards.
Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, it's so diverse, like Marines, Amazon, the hospital. It's like video. So it's so cool.
It's crazy. Look, Amazon is undeniably the behemoth of our time, anyone's time right now. Okay. And they are the tip of the spear. I admire everything they do. My experience was not a good experience for many reasons that I'm responsible for, and many reasons that I just think, there was issues where I was and the way business was conducted. All I'll say is this. I took this job. I was fast-tracked. I was on a fast-track program because I had an MBA. I was an area manager, then an operations manager. And throughout this time, and I had a child 2 months into my time there. And guess what? That aligned right with peak season, which is, just all hands on deck, mandatory overtime. 17-hour days. It was absolutely nuts. I had my first child. I didn't know what to expect, but all I knew was taking this job was going to make me who I thought I really wanted to be, which was this very providing father figure, an amazing husband who got us nice things, and we were able to take vacations and all this stuff. I was an absolutely miserable wreck from the beginning. I felt compelled to stay despite my financial advisor telling me I felt compelled to leave, even though my financial advisor was compelling me to stay because of stock. And I was just miserable, and my behavior changed dramatically. But I do know I impacted so many people while I was there because of the manner in which I managed. And that was, I wasn't afraid to do anything else. It became blue collar all over again. It reminded me of being an enlisted Marine, and I was able to help hourly associates understand some of the processes and some of the reasons behind some of these decisions, try and enhance their business acumen in some way, shape, or form. So everything that leadership, would flush down to me, I would flush it down all the way to the bottom as well, which is probably, why would he do that? Because I want them to understand. And because of that, my teams and my managers were unbelievably high performing. It got to the point, Roger, where I was helping cultivate these amazing young leaders, and then they'd send them to another shift that needed help, and then they would give me brand new people. And it was like, I was like, okay, fine. My shift is a talent factory, no problem. But throughout the whole course, the reason it was a miserable experience for me was because I had no one to look up to. Sorry, that's just the way it is. When you are surrounded by some of the people I was surrounded by, and some of the people who are no longer here anymore, and you have this vision of leadership in your head and people that you hope to emulate, and then it just dissipates, and now you're on the outside and things are different. I'm sorry, but I'm just not the type of person to just kind of fall in line and just meander through that. I did for a while until I made the decision it was time to go. Now, the reason earlier I said a lot of it was my fault was because I didn't have the courage. I felt like I was going to be a coward if I walked out of this job, like a job that there's people a line around the corner waiting to take your position anytime. no problem. But the way I saw it go down and my experiences, I just was making bad decisions. I was taking unnecessary risks. I was drinking, on my days off. I was obsessive about work all at the same time. And it just got to a place where I created a situation where, either I was just going to walk away or they were going to let me go, even though I was performing at a very high level. And it just went to show me, like, what am I doing? Like, you can create just opposing forces inside you if you don't take the time to really audit yourself and what you're doing and why you're doing it. And look, let me just say this to the audience. If you just go to bed and you're like, is this it? Then you really should tap into that. Tap into that, because if that's how it is every day when you go to bed, and if you get the sad Sundays, there's a problem. There's a problem, and it's worth looking into, because next thing you know, you'll be 5 years down the road and be like, what the hell have I done? So just don't let yourself get there. And, and I left, and it was the best decision I ever made.
Wow. Another amazing story. One question off of that, and that is, if people are going through this right now, like right now.
Yep.
But they just, that fear is just too great. What advice would you have? You did it. So you made that plunge. Is there anything else that you could just add to say, look, you have to think about this, or you have to think about that?
Yeah. Like, well, I have a very good friend, Kelsey, who's a life coach, and she says these are tugs. Like, it's like, just imagine there's all these strings tied around you, and there's a couple tugs in certain directions. And look, like, maybe you don't need a complete career change or anything like that, but maybe you walk by a guitar shop and you're just like, always wanted to learn how to play the guitar, right? Like, why don't you at least give yourself an hour a week to do that? Or 10 minutes a day to do that. Something that may satiate some of the curiosities that are happening within you. And maybe that is going to be an outlet for you. Maybe that's something you could look forward to enough to where your job doesn't feel as bad. Now, let's take it to the other side of it. You are completely miserable at work. Then what I would say is talk to your 10 most influential people in your network and talk to them about how you're feeling and see if they can assist. Hey, this might be a complete career shift, but I've had this just undeniable curiosity in this, and I don't think I'll ever be satiated until I actually explore it. What do you know anyone I could talk to? Do you know, as someone who wants to make that career change, that you are not going to get paid commensurate with your experience that you have where you are? Do you realize that you may have to take a pay cut? Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to downsize like I did? I went from that house in Austin, Texas, I was telling you about, to my in-laws' basement, which is 700 square feet. And I did that for 6 months. And you know what? It was worth every second. But these are the things that you need to do. What I would say is just take action in some way. Pay attention to those tugs. Don't deny them. And don't try and escape reality by watching a bunch of TV or drinking or just going out, and it'll all resurface. And you know what? If that stuff marinates enough, it could result in something catastrophic, and just a kind of an implosion that no one wants to experience. So pay attention to it, explore it, and just take action.
Great advice. Great advice. And I really like the fact that you said, don't be afraid to ask for help, especially your 10 most influential friends.
Yes.
Your network. Wonderful. Rich, wow, this has been an amazing conversation. One of our best podcasts. You were so awesome. I cannot wait to continue to watch you and your business. And I know we're going to be doing some things in the future. Before I let you go, one last question I ask every guest, and you're a decade younger than me, at least. You have a lot of life to live. But at the end of the day, your work here on earth, because as we know, we're not here forever. What do you want your legacy to be? What kind of mark do you want to leave?
I really would like to inspire my daughters. And that seems probably like low-hanging fruit, but my parents inspired me with work ethic, but there's no way they could have predicted I was going to be a Marine or an entrepreneur. There's no way they could give me advice on any of these things. There's nothing. I can't even talk to them about it because it's so foreign to them. So what they gave me was a work ethic to look at, and the fact that they were courageous enough to come over here and try and live with the quote unquote American dream. For me, it's like, okay, like how much can I advance this family name? And can I do so by showing my daughters that you don't have to do everything the way people say it's supposed to be done, and hopefully this business grows into something that, they can manage or run or take on. And that's what I want, because none of this was supposed to happen. and I want them to realize there's no set way to do anything, because I'm a very unorthodox individual. And I think that's okay. I used to be so hard on myself for that. I stayed in places I didn't have to because I was scared. And I think what I'm trying to tell you now that I'm circling back is just, you don't have to be scared of what's out there. If you punch that fear in the face on a daily basis, then life's going to be really good.
Rich Cardona, welcome to the American Real family. You are an amazing human. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into American Real. Be sure to visit our website, AmericanReal.tv, or search for us on iTunes or YouTube for past episodes. While you're there, please rate us or leave us a review, as that helps others find our show. I am truly grateful and appreciate all of your support. If you'd like to be part of our inner circle or want one-on-one coaching, check out the American Real Learning Academy, where we have self-help groups and courses so you can build the best you. We also have a new Facebook group where you can connect with high achievers from around the world. If you want to go even further, maybe you're determined to write your own book or launch your own podcast, contact me today to see if we could help. You can reach me through Instagram or Facebook, or email me directly at roger@americanreal.tv. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.